Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your EyeOpener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. The Manas Air Base, situated near the Kyrgyz capital of Bishkek, has played a key role in the increasingly important Central Asian region since its inception. First opened in December 2001 to support the US-led invasion of Afghanistan, the Manas Air Base plays host to the US 9th Air Force and serves primarily as a transit point for US goods and personnel coming and going from Afghanistan. As part of the so-called Northern Distribution Network, a key supply route for NATO troops in Afghanistan that bypasses the now-blockaded Pakistani borders, Manas continues to be a strategically vital asset for the US. At the same time, the base has also been a point of contention with the locals for years, and the controversy doesn't seem likely to die down anytime soon.
Gulmira Bekteneva's life has been scarred forever. She lives in the Kyrgyz capital Bishkek, and on one evening 7 years ago, she, along with her friend, were run over by an SUV, driven by an American officer serving at the Manas base. Her injuries were so bad, Gulmira's spleen had to be removed, her liver was damaged, and she suffered a major brain concussion.
The road was clear. We started crossing and all of a sudden we saw bright lights, heard the sound of car brakes. Then there was a hit and I don't remember anything after that.
The officer's name has never been made public, and some sources suggest he was drunk during the incident. Other reports say he avoided the drug check due to diplomatic immunity enjoyed by all staff at the base. It is known this man remains unpunished.
You need to move away, turn cameras off.
This wasn't the only incident involving American soldiers and locals. In 2006, a Kyrgyz citizen was shot dead by a US serviceman at the base. There have also been reports of fights between military staff and the local population. That's why for some, the news that the parliament is considering closing the base is more than welcome.
Some people may forgive them, but I can't. I know it's a sin, but I hate them with all my heart.
The effect the base has on the lives of local children is also causing concern. There have been reports of American planes dumping excess fuel mid-air, which rains down on surrounding villages, just like this one near the capital.
The US needs to look hard at the effectiveness of their actions in Central Asia. What about in Kyrgyzstan? Not even one profitable economic project up until now. So they have themselves to blame.
They call it Operation Enduring Misery. Several times a day, US military planes take off from an airport near the Kyrgyz capital Bishkek, their engines generating a lot of anger among the locals.
It's so noisy here. I can barely sleep.
Back in Soviet times, the village of Mramarne was famous across Kyrgyzstan for its gigantic watermelons. But ever since the Americans landed here 10 years ago, locals say the quality of their crops has been steadily declining. Like most of his neighbors, Fyodor Nikolaevich is convinced Americans are dumping fuel on the fields surrounding the base, which its commanders deny.
I watch the US planes come and go several times a day. I know their schedule to a T. The noise is disturbing, but I sort of got used to it. What's really bad is that they're killing nature, the fields and the crops. And people's health is getting worse too.
The base's deep unpopularity with the local Kyrgyz people has been a leverage point for successive administrations in their negotiations with the Americans for the continued use of the facility. Just last month, the newly elected president of Kyrgyzstan, Almazbek Atambayev, said that his government will once again be seeking the base's closure in time for the United States' supposed 2014 pullout from Afghanistan. But as important as the base is to the Kyrgyz people, the true nature of Manas remains an open question. For years, it has been at the center of a string of allegations revolving around drug running, terrorism, and stage-managed revolutions. One of the most surprising revelations to emerge from Manas centered around the story of Abdolmalek Rigi, the former leader of the Jundula terrorist organization who was captured by Iran on board a flight from the United Arab Emirates to Kyrgyzstan. Jundula is a Pakistani tribal militant group that concerns itself with the plight of Sunni Muslims in the predominantly Shiite Iran. Despite widely acknowledged links to al-Qaeda, the CIA has been funding the group for years as a proxy force to commit attacks inside Iran, where it is believed to have killed and injured over 500 civilians since 2003. As Rigi himself told his Iranian captors, his story includes the airbase at Manas, which he claims the US uses to conduct covert meetings with people like himself.
They told me that in Kyrgyzstan they have a base called Manas near Bishkek, and that a high-ranking person was coming to meet me. And when such grand high-ranking persons come, Emirates intelligence would take these people under observation. But in a place like Bishkek, this high-ranking American person could come, and we could reach agreement reach agreement on making the proper contacts.
Last year, Global Research Associate Peter Dale Scott wrote a lengthy article outlining how U.S. intervention in Kyrgyzstan in the name of protecting its strategic airbase has led to the destabilization of Kyrgyz politics and to a drastic increase in the flow of drugs through the country. In 2005, Kyrgyzstan's own color revolution, the so-called Tulip Revolution, brought Kurmanbek Bakiev into power. According to Kyrgyz political commentators, the entire Bakiev family was involved in drug trafficking, and they used the opportunity to kill off competing drug lords and consolidate the lucrative business of trafficking Afghan heroin. In October 2009, Bakiev abolished the Kyrgyz Drug Control Agency, and the already steady flow of narcotics in the country continued to increase. In addition, there has been much speculation about the true nature of the Tulip Revolution itself. Although it did represent a popular uprising against a corrupt and increasingly unpopular leader, this was by far the bloodiest of the color revolutions, with the new leader coming to power on the backs of over 360 wounded civilians. The Bakiev government that stepped in to take over was a highly coordinated, and some say covertly directed, coup faction that left even Edelbaysalov, one of Kyrgyzstan's premier democracy advocates, lamenting, "Let's not pretend that what happened here was democratic." The timing of the revolution itself was suspiciously fortuitous for the United States, which had enjoyed good relations with President Akayev from the time of the opening of the Manas base in 2001 until October 2003, when Akayev allowed the reopening of an old Soviet base in Kant by the Russians in the name of combating terror in neighboring Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Kyrgyzstan was immediately put on the U.S. State Department's watch list, and aid increased to Kyrgyz opposition groups via a number of American-based NGOs. Curiously, according to Der Spiegel, Rosa Odenbayeva, a Kyrgyz politician who took over the presidency after Bakiev himself was ousted in 2010, pledged her support during the time of the Tulip Revolution to our American friends at Freedom House, who donated a printing press in Bishkek to the opposition, and to George Soros, a speculator who previously helped unseat Eduard Shevardnadze's government in Georgia. Earlier this week, I had the chance to talk to Justin Burke, the managing editor of the Epi award-winning website EurasiaNet, which is funded by the George Soros-founded Open Society Institute, about the allegations that the Tulip Revolution was manipulated by outside interests.
Those allegations are wishful thinking on the parts of people who are opposed to the advent of civil society in that part of the region, I would say. That's not. I know basically it's a canard. It's something that there are people with vested interests in the region that it's easy to blame those, cite those factors as the reason for events such as the Tulip Revolution. But ultimately it comes down to these kinds of political developments come down to the fact that the governments in the region are not responsive to the needs of their populations. They get into power, and then it becomes a money-making operation. For the presidential family and their close friends and relatives. And the infrastructure of the country is left to rot. And this is a pattern that has happened, unfortunately, in too many countries in the region. And when governments in the region experience these kind of problems, that is really probably the number one cause. People have lived for too long without redress to their complaints. They don't have enough heating. They don't have enough electricity. The educational infrastructure has completely collapsed. And in some countries like Turkmenistan, the healthcare infrastructure has collapsed. So you really want to look for the reasons why populations say enough and rise up. You really have to look no further to the performance of the governments themselves and the responsiveness to the myriad social issues.
Regardless of the nature of the base and its involvement in various covert U.S. military operations in the greater Afghan theater, it is indisputably a lightning rod for controversy, a point of contention with the Kyrgyz government, and a thorn in the side of Russia, which fears the spread of NATO influence in an area that it has traditionally considered its backyard. Last week I talked to Rick Rozoff of Stop NATO International about the base and how it will potentially be used in the future. I began by asking whether he takes the incoming Kyrgyz president's latest threats to close the base seriously, given how many times the base's closure has been talked about in the past.
I'm with you, James, that we've been bitten too many times by these rumors to be overly optimistic about the recent ones, with the incoming president claiming he's going to close down the base. We have to keep in mind, of course, that the United States is claiming, and NATO is claiming, that they're going to withdraw the bulk of their military forces within the next 3 years, that is by 2014. However, a leading German general assigned to NATO's International Security Assistance Force a few days ago mentioned that NATO will retain at least 15,000 troops in Afghanistan past 2014. That may be a conservative estimate. It would be intriguing, of course, if the incoming administration in Bishkek does in fact live up to that pledge and closes down the transit center at Manas on the heels of Pakistan, after the deadly raid by NATO aircraft on November 26th that killed at least 24 of their soldiers, has blockaded essentially NATO supplies coming into Afghanistan. And as there have been soundings from Russia that with the increasingly aggressive and dangerous moves by the US and NATO with their so-called missile shield, that is their interceptor missile, potentially first strike system they'll be installing in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus eventually, in the Black Sea, in Turkey with the radar installation, that Russia itself might, look at halting what's called the Northern Distribution Network for non-lethal supplies going into the U.S. and NATO troops in Afghanistan. Should the three of these occur more or less simultaneously, that is, Pakistan blocking the shipment of NATO supplies into Afghanistan, with Russia doing the same, and Kyrgyzstan closing down the Manas transit center, a situation may come into existence that one Pakistani analyst a couple of weeks ago referred to as a Vietnam-style retreat. I think maybe an earlier Indo-Chinese allusion that a Dien Bien Phu in 1954 with the French might be in order. That is, you might have upward of 130, 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops trapped in Afghanistan without being able to be resupplied, or in the case of Kyrgyzstan, even being able to get out.
Ultimately, the question of the Manas Air Base, or the transit facility at Manas, as the US hopefully renamed it in its latest rounds of negotiations with the Kyrgyz government, is not a small question about an isolated Central Asian state of questionable democratic abilities. The question is the much greater one of a struggle for the region as a whole, and it involves not only the US, but Russia, China, and a host of nations with a toehold in this geostrategically vital section of the globe. As both a founding member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and a participant in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the regional security organization that is seeking to bring together the regional players on contentious matters before the anticipated NATO pullout from Afghanistan in 2014, Kyrgyzstan is straddling a fault line in the tectonics of geopolitics. And like any other fault line, it is an area of danger and uncertainty, perhaps best represented by the Manas base itself, which continues to be the focus of scandal, controversy, and potential future conflict in the region. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.